Hello, I am Dr. Aizaz from MedicoVisual.com, and in today's visual lecture we will talk about pharyngeal apparatus and pharyngeal arches. So let's start from the very basic concept that you have already seen that during third week of development, during the process of gastrulation, this trilaminar germ disc was formed. So it is a flat disc which consists of three germ layers. The outermost is the ectoderm. So here is this bluish one is the ectoderm, and innermost was the endoderm. Innermost is the endoderm, and in between ecto and endoderm is the mesoderm. And here this part is called oropharyngeal membrane, and this is the cranial end, let's suppose, and this is the caudal end. And here at the caudal end, this depression is called cloacal membrane. What is oropharyngeal and cloacal membrane? Basically, you can see here that ectoderm is pushed downward here and here as well, and here endoderm is also pushed inward, I mean upwards, or you can say dorsally. And here the ecto and endoderm is tightly stitched together with very little to no mesoderm in between them. So here you can see that there is almost no mesoderm between ecto and endoderm. So basically these are bilaminar structures. The cranial end is oropharyngeal membrane, which is the primordium of mouth of the baby, and cloacal membrane is at the caudal end, and it is also a bilaminar structure, and it is the primordium of the anal opening and urethral opening. We will discuss the details in upcoming lectures. And of course there was the amniotic cavity, and here was the yolk sac cavity, but I deliberately skipped those in this 3D model to keep the things simpler. So ectoderm, endoderm and mesoderm. Now this trilaminar, this flat disc-like embryo nowhere resembles a human baby. It does not even remotely look like a human baby. So to form the fetus from this flat disc, it undergoes the craniocaudal and transverse folding. So here you can see that it is undergoing the transverse folding here, like this. These parts, they will come to meet in the center like this. So as a result of this transverse folding, these three cylinders are formed here, and similar to that, now it will undergo the craniocaudal folding. So cranial folding from here and caudal folding from here. So craniocaudal folding will occur, and now what will be the now this will be the structure that will be formed. So here is the end structure. Now what it consists of is that it consists of three cylinders which are nested inside one another. The outermost cylinder is the ectoderm, and innermost is the endoderm, and in between ecto and endoderm is this greenish one, the mesoderm. Now basically what happens is that these cylinders will become stitched together. These ends, they will meet together, they will become stitched together, and now we will have three tubes or three cylinders nested inside one another. So here is the structure that will be formed. So a leech like structure will be formed, and if we cut a section of this is the ectoderm. If we cut a section here, let me cut a section. So if we cut a section from front, here you can see that this is the ectoderm, this is the outermost tube, and then here is the mesoderm. And let's cut a section of mesoderm as well. So here you can see that inside the ectoderm is another column, that is mesoderm, and inside mesoderm there is further another nested column, another nested tube, that is, what is that? Endoderm. So let's cut it here as well. So here are the three tubes. Ectoderm, inside the ectoderm is the mesoderm, and inside the mesoderm is the endoderm. Let's cut the section from sides as well, so these things will become more clear to you. So here is the side cut section of the ectoderm, and here is the side cut section of mesoderm, and here is the side cut section of endoderm. And here you can see that as a result of folding, this oropharyngeal membrane and this cloacal membrane, both of them, they have become ventrally, they have came ventrally. And here you can see that in between the ecto and endoderm, at these two regions, there is almost no mesoderm. There is no mesoderm in between these two, in between the ecto and endoderm at these two places. Also, please note that this endoderm, it is connected with the yolk sac cavity. So there would be this yolk sac cavity. So this endoderm is connected with this yolk sac cavity through what we call as vitelline duct. But I have deliberately not shown those structures in this diagram because that is not relevant with our topic. So this is the embryo that is formed as a result of folding. Now the embryo does not remain as a flat tube, but it becomes more curved cranially as well as caudally. So this is now the structure of an embryo. So here is the endoderm, mesoderm, and ectoderm. And one thing that is worth mentioning here, that during third week of development, a neural tube was also formed, and neural tube will be placed here. So here is the neural tube. So you can see that neural tube is here, and the neural tube initially it has almost the similar thickness all around, except at the caudal most end where it is much more tapered. But other than this caudal end, it has almost a similar thickness. But later what happens that it forms some bulges or swellings. So let's see what happens. So here you can see that it forms some bulges. So these are the bulges from which the central nervous system will develop. We will not discuss the details of these swellings, but as a result of these swellings, this ectoderm as well as mesoderm, it also protruded forward. Here you can see that this ectoderm, it protruded forward, and the swelling that is externally visible, if I uncut this, so this swelling here that is externally visible, this is actually called frontonasal prominence. So as a result of formation of these CNS swellings, especially this forebrain swelling, let me tell you, this is by the way called forebrain swelling. So as a result of formation of this forebrain swelling, the ectoderm formed what we call as frontonasal prominence. So whole this is, it is an unpaired swelling which is called frontonasal swelling. So here is the frontonasal swelling. Another thing that must be mentioned here is that, as we have already discussed, that as a result of neural tube formation, neural crest cells will also be formed. So let's go back to third week and let's see how neural crest cells formed. So during third week of development, initially a thickness of ectoderm here, a central thickness was formed. This is called neural plate, and then there is some invagination of cells from this thickness. So cells invaginated downwards, and then they separated from this surface ectoderm. By the way, this depression that is formed is called neural groove, and then as the cells separated, here the neural tube is formed, and these cells which were lying at the crest at the top of this tube, they are separated as neural crest cells. So these neural crest cells, they will then separate and they will move to different parts of the body. They will form many different structures, and because of this, neural crest cell is also called the fourth layer of the embryo. What I think of these neural crest cells is that they are like envoy, they are like representative of central nervous system to different parts of the body. So some very important structures in different parts of the body are formed by the neural crest cells. So here in this diagram, what will happen that neural crest cells from here, the central nervous system, this part, they will migrate to different parts of the body. They will migrate ventrolaterally to different parts of the body. Especially they will also migrate towards the head and neck region. So what will happen when they migrate towards the head and neck region? Let me briefly explain on this diagram, and then we will see on a cut section. When the neural crest cells will migrate to mesoderm of this head and neck region, here at this part special swellings will be formed, and those swellings are basically called pharyngeal arches. I know you are confused, so let's first take a cross section of this area. Let's say we have cut a section like this from here. Let's cut a section here and let's separate it on the side, and then we will see what exactly happens. So here is the cut section here, and here you can see that this is the neural tube. Here is the neural tube, and here is the endoderm, and this is the mesoderm. Here is the ectoderm, and here is the neural crest cells. Now basically what happens is that this neural crest cells, they will move ventrolaterally at this position, and as it happens, here there will be a formation of a swelling, and that swelling is called pharyngeal arch. Now this mesoderm, it is a much simplified version of actual mesoderm. Actually, mesoderm is not like this, but it is divided into certain parts. It consists of this paraxial mesoderm, this intermediate mesoderm, and this lateral plate mesoderm. So this is much more realistic version of what a mesoderm looks like. And of course, inside the structure, it consists of loosely arranged mesenchymal cells. So here is the 2D view of that same cut section. Here is the paraxial mesoderm, here is the lateral plate mesoderm, and I have removed the intermediate mesoderm here for the sake of simplicity, because intermediate mesoderm is not required to be discussed here. There is no role of intermediate mesoderm in the pharyngeal arches development. Now let's hide this part, because exactly the same thing happens bilaterally. So let's focus on this part only. Now, as I've told you that this paraxial and lateral plate and any type of mesoderm, it basically consists of loosely arranged mesenchymal cells. So here is another way of depicting this mesoderm. So this pinkish cell, they represent the paraxial mesoderm. They represent the mesenchymal cells of paraxial mesoderm, and these yellowish cells, they represent the mesenchymal cells of lateral plate mesoderm, and these are the mesenchymal cells of neural crest cells. Now let's see what happens. Now these neural crest cells, they will migrate ventrolaterally, and as it happens, first they will come towards this paraxial cells, paraxial mesenchymal cells. Here some of the paraxial mesoderm, they will join this envy of neural crest cells, and both of them, they will migrate here. So here both of them, they will migrate here, and as it happens, they will displace most of the lateral plate mesenchymal cells ventrally, and here as more and more cells come to lie here, they will also proliferate here, and this will lead to a formation of an elevation, a surface ectodermal surface elevation here. So here they will further proliferate, and here is that surface elevation, and hold this structure from here up to here, this is now called pharyngeal arch. Now what this pharyngeal arch basically consists of is that outer side, on the outer side it is lined by this ectoderm. So here is the bluish thing, ectoderm. On the outer side it is lined by ectoderm. On the inner side here it is lined by this endoderm, and this part of endoderm, it is going to form the pharynx. So from inner side it is lined by primordial pharyngeal wall. From the outer side it is lined by this what we call as ectoderm, and in between these two, ecto and endoderm, is again here the mesoderm. And this mesoderm of this pharyngeal arch, it basically consists of mainly neural crest cells, then along with neural crest cells, some paraxial mesodermal cells, and then some lateral plate mesodermal cells. So basically, paraxial mesoderm, lateral plate mesoderm, as well as neural crest cells contribute towards the mesoderm of pharyngeal arches. The major contribution is of neural crest cells. Then the second one, it is followed by paraxial mesoderm, and then there is some little contribution from the lateral plate mesoderm, especially for the pharyngeal arch 1, 2, and 3. For the arch 4 and 6, lateral plate mesoderm has much more contribution as compared to paraxial mesoderm. So if we see on the 3D diagram, you can see that here the neural crest cells, they will migrate to this area here, and here swelling will be formed bilaterally. The paired swelling will be formed, and I think it looks like a kitty. So by the way, this is the cross section of pharyngeal arch. Hey, sorry for interruption, but this is to inform you that this lecture is the part of premium head and neck embryology lecture series. Please consider buying that course if you want to learn the whole chapter in a bit more detail. There are 70 plus MCQs for practice with that as well, and along with that there are several other mnemonics to master all this chapter. Link is in the description. Put YouTube as a coupon code at checkout for a flat 20% discount. Thank you. Back to the lecture now. Now let's hide this structure and let's go to that diagram. Let's focus on that diagram. So after the pharyngeal arches are formed, let's see how it looks like. So here is the frontonasal prominence, and just caudal to this frontonasal prominence is the first arch. Now the first arch, it is subdivided into two swellings. It is subdivided into two parts. This is the maxillary process and this is the mandibular process. So there are two subdivisions of first arch, maxillary as well as mandibular process. This maxillary process, it surrounds the oropharyngeal membrane. Here is the oropharyngeal membrane, and this is the primordium of mouth, which is also called stomodium. So maxillary process of first arch, it surrounds the stomodium. So both of these processes, they form the first arch, and then caudal to this first arch, this is the first arch. Caudal to this first arch, here is the second arch, and then caudal to second arch is third arch, then fourth arch, and then here is the caudal most one is sixth arch. Sixth arch? Dr. Aizaz, you have forgotten fifth arch. Well, no, I have not forgotten fifth arch. Actually, in humans, either the fifth arch never forms, or if it forms, it is rudimentary. It does not have any role in development of head and neck structures. So we do not usually create this fifth arch in 3D models and illustrations. So basically, we have how many arches? Five arches. First arch, second arch, third arch, fourth arch, and then sixth arch. So there is no fifth arch. So now that you have understood the development of pharyngeal arches, now let's see the structure of these arches. These are so confusingly presented in your textbook that most of the students, they do not know that what these pharyngeal arches consist of. They are quite confused about the concept of pharyngeal arches. So what I'm gonna do is that first I'm gonna tell you the wrong concept of pharyngeal arches, and then I will tell you that what is the correct concept of pharyngeal arches. So let's cut a section of these arches from here. Let's cut a section here and let's see what happens. So here is the ectoderm. Let me cut it. So now here I have cut a section. Now you may be thinking that here this wall is ectoderm, right? This wall is ectoderm, and this wall, this margin of pharyngeal arch, this margin of pharyngeal arch, it is made up of endoderm. Here is also, you may be thinking that this is ectoderm and this is endoderm, and so on, ecto and endoderm. I know some of you might be thinking it like this because that's what you have been seeing in the textbook. But let me tell you, this is wrong concept, my friends. All this is ectoderm. This is also ectoderm. This is also ectoderm. This is not endoderm. So what about that structure that you have been studying in your textbook? Here also this is ectoderm. So whole this is ectoderm. Actually, that is another section. That is not front section. That is back section. That is section from here. So let's uncut this section and let's cut a section from back. So if we cut a section from back, let me show you how. So if you cut a section like this from here, then what you will see? Let me show you. So here I have cut a section of ectoderm, and now let's cut a section of mesoderm as well. So here we have cut a section of mesoderm as well, and now here you can see that here is the ectoderm, here is the mesoderm, and here is the endodermal tube or endoderm. And by the way, here is your the what is this, neural tube. So let's hide the neural tube, and here let's cut a section of this endoderm as well. So here is the section of endoderm, and now you can see that here it consists of endoderm on the inside. So here is, let's suppose here is the second arch, right side as well as left side, and now you can see that it consists of outer side. From outside it consists of ectoderm, from inside it consists of endoderm, the pharyngeal endoderm, the pharyngeal part of endoderm, and in between is the mesoderm. Now what will happen is that this endoderm, this pharyngeal endoderm, it will form outpocketings or pouches. What I mean by this is that from here, from this part, some extensions or outpocketings will be formed, and we call them pharyngeal pouches. So let me tell you how they form. So here you can see that it was basically a smooth endoderm initially. You can see that its lateral wall, the endodermal lateral wall, was quite smooth, but now they form this evaginations or outpocketings, and these evaginations or outpocketings here, these are the outpocketings. These are called pharyngeal pouches. So here you can see that here is a pharyngeal pouch. So pharyngeal pouches are formed, and pharyngeal pouches, they are formed between first and second arch, then between second and third arch, then between third and fourth arch. So here is the first arch, and here is the second arch. So in between first and second arch, this first pharyngeal pouch is formed, and this pharyngeal pouch, it will extend laterally till it almost reaches this groove. Here it reaches this groove here. So here they will almost coalesce together, they will combine together, and this part is called pharyngeal membrane. So here is the pharyngeal membrane, and pharyngeal membrane is the part where the pharyngeal pouch as well as this groove or cleft, by the way these are called pharyngeal cleft. So here at this pharyngeal membrane, the pharyngeal pouch as well as the pharyngeal groove, they meet together, or pharyngeal pouch and pharyngeal cleft, they meet together, and in between them there is almost no mesoderm initially, but later on it is also infiltrated by the mesoderm in between these two structures. So this is the structure that you are used to seeing in the textbooks. So if we see in a diagram, so here is the diagram. Here you can see, let's focus here. So here is the pharyngeal arch. This is, let's suppose, first pharyngeal arch. It consists of the endoderm. On the inner side it is lined by endoderm, on the outer side it is lined by ectoderm, and here from the outside if we look, here is the pharyngeal cleft, first pharyngeal cleft, and if we look from the inner side, here is the first pharyngeal pouch. So similar to that, here is the second arch, and here is the second pharyngeal cleft or pharyngeal groove, and here is the second pharyngeal pouch, or yeah, here is the second pharyngeal pouch, and third and fourth and so on. So basically we have 4 pharyngeal pouches and 4 pharyngeal grooves, and by the way here this is the pharyngeal membrane. So 4 pharyngeal pouches and 4 pharyngeal grooves are clefts, and total we have 5 pharyngeal arches, right? So if you are still confused, let's see in this 3D diagram that here is the first pharyngeal pouch, and here these depression in the ectoderm, these ectodermal depressions here after first arch, here is the first arch. So after first arch, this ectodermal depression here is the first pharyngeal cleft, then here is the second pharyngeal cleft, third pharyngeal cleft, and fourth pharyngeal cleft. So these are basically paired structures. So we have 4 pharyngeal clefts, first, second, third, and fourth, and similar to that on the inner side we have 4 pharyngeal pouches. So this is basically the structure of pharyngeal arches. Now, all these structures, these pharyngeal pouches, all four pharyngeal pouches, all four pharyngeal clefts, and all the pharyngeal arches, whole this complete complex of structure, it is actually called pharyngeal apparatus. I hope after seeing this structure, you will never be confused about the pharyngeal apparatus. And by the way, here is the neural tube. Now let me tell you something interesting that from the hindbrain as well as the midbrain swellings of of this neural tube, the cranial nerves will arise and they will go to these pharyngeal arches. So each arch will be supplied by one or more division of these cranial nerves, right? So first arch is supplied by fifth cranial nerve, maxillary and mandibular division. Second arch is supplied by facial nerve. Don't worry about these cranial nerves. We will discuss that in later lectures. But what I want to highlight here is that each pharyngeal arch consists of its own cranial nerve or cranial nerve division. So each arch has its own nerve. Each arch also has its own artery. So here is the artery of pharyngeal arch of each pharyngeal arch. Now where these pharyngeal arch arteries came from, basically they arise from aortic arches. These are basically aortic arches, but I will not discuss the structure, the details of aortic arches. We will have separate lecture on aortic arches when we will discuss the development of CVS, the cardiovascular system. But for now, just remember that each pharyngeal arch consists of pharyngeal pouch, pharyngeal mesoderm, along with the pharyngeal artery and pharyngeal nerve, and it also consists of pharyngeal clefts or pharyngeal grooves. And by the way, the neural crest cells that came here, they will also form special cartilages. They will form some bars of cartilage that are going to form important skeleton structures of the head and neck region. So in this diagram, you can see that we have cut a section here, and here if you see the structure of a pharyngeal arch, you can see that it consists of its own nerve, a cranial nerve division, its own artery, and it also consists of branchial cartilage, which are basically the cartilaginous bars that are going to form the skeleton structures. Skeleton structures of head and neck region, they are mainly formed by neural crest cells. How by neural crest cells? With the help of these cartilaginous bars. And the mesoderm that is surrounding this, which consists mainly of paraxial mesoderm, and to some extent it consists of lateral plate mesoderm. This paraxial mesoderm, it is going to form the pharyngeal muscles, the muscles of head and neck regions, right? And what about the lateral plate mesoderm? Lateral plate mesoderm, it mainly contributes towards the vascular system. It mainly contributes towards the blood vessels of pharyngeal arches structures. If you really want to understand these components of pharyngeal arch, let's consider it in another way. The pharyngeal arches also develop in fishes, and in fishes, these pharyngeal arches, they are basically the primordium of gills. These pharyngeal arches, they will form the gills. So that is why the pharyngeal arches are also called gill arches or branchial arches. Although no gill develops in humans, but still some embryologists call these pharyngeal arches as gill arches or branchial arches, irrespective of whether they are talking about human embryo or the fish embryos. So let's consider these pharyngeal arches as primordium of gills, and as you know that each gill consists of some muscles to control the gills, blood vessels for exchange of material, and nervous system, I mean nerves, to coordinate those gills, and of course they also have some cartilages to maintain the rigidity. So if you think these pharyngeal arches as primordium of gills, it will become very easy to remember these components, these nerve, muscles, and cartilage, etc. It will become very easy to understand the rationale of their presence in the pharyngeal arch. But why all the fuss about pharyngeal arches here in human embryology? We are discussing human embryology. We are not discussing fish embryology. So why are we discussing the pharyngeal arches? My friends, there is a very good reason for this. In humans, some very important structures of head and neck are developed from pharyngeal arches. Although no gill develops from them, but some very important structures of head and neck region, they arise from the pharyngeal arches. And what are those structures and how they will develop from each of the pharyngeal arch? We will discuss each of the pharyngeal arch one by one in the upcoming lectures. Thank you so much for watching this video.